Welcome to the Overthinker's Guide to Modern Marketing, or as we like to call it,
How to Sell a Sandwich Without Accidentally Starting a Cult.
Welcome back to the Overthinker's Guide to Modern Marketing, the podcast for people who've ever opened a marketing dashboard looking for clarity and instead discovered 17 tabs, 3 conflicting opinions, and a graph that feels vaguely disappointed in you. I'm your host, Sean Makin, a man who approaches marketing strategy with the same energy squirrels apply to hiding nuts. Frantic, obsessive, and with absolutely no certainty any of it will make sense later. Before we begin, please make yourself comfortable, ideally somewhere expensive looking, somewhere with soft lighting, aggressively minimalist furniture, and the kind of atmosphere that suggests somebody nearby owns a notebook purely for ideas. And if you could also acquire a drink so artisanal it requires both a backstory and a serving ritual, that would help complete the experience nicely. Right then, today we are tackling one of modern marketing's most persistent questions. Why does marketing still feel suspiciously like guessing even when you have enough data to wallpaper an entire office with pie charts? Because somewhere between analytics dashboards, attribution models, audience segmentation, and weekly reports containing phrases like engagement velocity, many marketers have quietly arrived at the same conclusion. We appear to have measured everything except certainty.
Episode 12. Is marketing just guessing, or
Why it feels like it, even when you have data.
Let's begin with one of the great promises of modern marketing. Data will remove uncertainty. That was the pitch. Once we had analytics dashboards, behavioural tracking, attribution models, engagement metrics, heat maps, user journeys, and enough acronyms to make ordinary conversation structurally impossible, marketing would finally become scientific, precise, predictable, like engineering or tax evasion among large corporations. And to be fair, data has changed marketing. We now can track astonishing amounts of information. We know where people came from, what they clicked, how long they stayed, what device they used, how far they scrolled, and in some cases, the exact moment they emotionally disengaged from the landing page. Which is useful. Slightly unsettling, but useful. There was a time when marketers had almost none of this. Entire campaigns were launched based on an instinct, optimism, and a suspiciously confident man named Derek saying things like,
"People love the color orange."
and occasionally, Derek was right. Which is deeply annoying for everyone who now spends 6 hours building performance reports. There is a particular kind of confidence unique to marketing analytics platforms. No matter what's happening, the dashboard always looks convinced, even when everything is collapsing. Traffic down 48%? The graph remains calm. Campaign falling spectacularly? The pie charts stay strangely upbeat. It's the visual equivalent of someone saying,
Well, this is certainly interesting.
while the building quietly fills with smoke. Now, naturally, once businesses realised they could measure things, they became extremely enthusiastic about measuring absolutely everything. Open rates, bounce rates, engagement rates, click-through rates, conversion rates. At one point, someone almost certainly tried to invent rate rates. And somewhere along the way, a curious thing happened. The data became so detailed that people assumed that this must also mean it was providing certainty. But data does not eliminate uncertainty. It simply gives uncertainty charts. Because numbers can tell you what happened. They can tell you 4,000 people visited your website, 900 clicked a button, 112 abandoned a form halfway through. And one person spent 17 minutes reading your About page at 2:14 AM for reasons nobody fully understands. But data struggles enormously with the more important question. Why? Why did one headline succeed when another failed? Why did people ignore the carefully researched campaign but enthusiastically engage with a post someone wrote in 6 exhausted minutes while eating toast? Why do users routinely behave like people who were given clear instructions and then decided to follow an entirely different emotional journey?
Somewhere in every marketing department is a campaign that should have worked. The strategy was flawless, the targeting precise, the messaging refined through 12 rounds of stakeholder feedback and at least one emotionally difficult meeting. It failed completely. Meanwhile, a blurry behind-the-scenes photo posted accidentally on Instagram becomes the company's highest performing content of the year. No one speaks of this openly, but everyone remembers it.
And this is where the illusion begins to crack slightly. Because despite all the sophistication, marketing still contains an uncomfortable amount of educated guesswork. Not reckless guessing, not random chaos, but interpretation, judgement, instinct. Because data can guide decisions, but it cannot fully explain human beings. Unfortunately for marketers, human beings remain the central feature of the entire system, which, as we'll discover next, is where things become properly complicated.
Part 2. The problem with humans.
Unfortunately, the central variable in marketing remains exactly what it has always been: people. And people are deeply inconvenient, because for all our dashboards, analytics platforms and behavioural tracking tools, human beings continue to make decisions in ways that appear, at times, almost artistically irrational. People will ignore a perfectly targeted advert, then buy something at 1 AM because the packaging felt honest. They will spend 3 weeks researching a £14 kitchen appliance and purchase a luxury sofa after seeing precisely one photograph involving a Labrador and good lighting. There is an entire category of consumer behaviour best described as,
"I don't know why I bought this, but apparently we live like this now."
Marketing researchers study this constantly. The results are usually summarised in long reports containing phrases like emotionally led purchase behaviour, which is a very professional way of saying
People panic bought candles again.
and this is the core problem. Humans do not behave consistently enough to make marketing feel entirely scientific, because people are not equations. They are emotions carrying credit cards. One person clicks because they're curious, another because they're bored, a third because they misread the button entirely and are now too committed to back out. And somehow all three appear in the same analytics report, simply labelled user engagement, which is technically correct but emotionally misleading. This is why marketing can feel strange even when the data looks clear, because numbers create the illusion that people are behaving rationally, when in reality they are behaving humanly. And those are very different things. Take headlines for example. A carefully tested headline might outperform every alternative for 6 straight months, and then suddenly stop working entirely because the internet collectively decided it sounds exhausting. Not wrong, not offensive, just a bit much. There are phrases in marketing that simply wear out over time. At first they sound exciting, then overused, then suspicious. Eventually they achieve a kind of corporate afterlife where they continue existing despite nobody believing them anymore. Phrases like game-changing, disruptive, unlock your potential, and circle back, particularly circle back. No one has felt joy hearing circle back. At best, it suggests administrative inevitability. At worst, it sounds like the beginning of a hostage negotiation conducted entirely through calendar invites. And this unpredictability is what makes marketing simultaneously fascinating and slightly maddening, because humans don't simply respond to logic. They respond to mood, timing, trust, familiarity, colour, tone, social proof, and occasionally whether they've had lunch yet. Which means two campaigns with nearly identical data can produce wildly different outcomes, not because the data is wrong, but because people are complicated. And marketers naturally respond to this complexity in the most reasonable way possible, by creating even more dashboards. As though somewhere hidden beneath one final layer of analytics, there exists a graph capable of explaining why someone watched 94% of a video ad and then immediately purchased garden furniture at midnight. But despite this unpredictability, there are patterns. Not perfect certainty, not complete control, but patterns. And good marketing lives in understanding the difference between
People always behave this way.
and,
People often behave this way until something emotional interrupts the process entirely.
because once you accept that marketing involves human beings, you stop expecting certainty and start looking for understanding instead.
Part 3. The illusion of certainty.
Now, this is where things become genuinely dangerous, Because data does something extraordinarily powerful to the human brain. It creates confidence, not necessarily accuracy, not wisdom, certainly not emotional stability, but confidence. There is something about a graph, particularly one with upward movement, that immediately causes people to speak in firmer tones. Suddenly everyone in the room develops the energy of a minor prophet interpreting sacred markings. Phrases like,
"The data clearly shows. The audience has spoken. The numbers don't lie."
which is interesting, because numbers, technically speaking, don't say anything at all. People say things about numbers, and sometimes these people are guessing with remarkable professionalism. There exists a specific species of meeting found almost exclusively in marketing departments, where a graph is placed on a large screen and everybody collectively pretends to understand it at exactly the same level. No one wants to ask questions first. This would imply weakness, so instead everybody nods thoughtfully while internally thinking,
I'm sure the red line is bad.
Occasionally someone says,
Interesting.
which buys another 4 minutes. And this is how data slowly transforms from a useful tool into a modern kind of mythology. Because once organisations have enough metrics, dashboards and reporting structures in place, people begin treating measurements as certainty itself. Clicks become proof of interest, views become proof of impact, engagement becomes proof of connection, even when none of those things necessarily mean what people desperately want them to mean. A post receives thousands of likes. Wonderful. Did it increase trust? No idea. Did it create customers? Unclear. Did it make people briefly forget they were waiting for a train? Possibly. This is the hidden danger of analytics. Metrics are seductive because they are measurable, and measurable things feel, well, controllable. Which is why marketing departments occasionally end up optimizing for numbers that look impressive in reports but accomplish almost nothing at all in reality. At one point, somewhere in the corporate world, a marketing team became so obsessed with increasing engagement they accidentally created content nobody enjoyed but everybody argued about. Technically, the campaign was extremely successful. Emotionally, it resembled a family dispute at Christmas involving politics, wine, and one uncle who suddenly had very strong opinions about cryptocurrency. The engagement metrics were phenomenal. Morale was not. This is what happens when numbers become detached from meaning, because data by itself cannot tell you what actually matters. It can only tell you what was measured, and those are very, very different things. Now, naturally, once companies realise this, their immediate response is not supposedly, oh no, it's to create more metrics. Soon there are dashboards tracking dashboards, reports summarising reports, weekly meetings explaining why the monthly metrics contradicted the quarterly metrics generated from the annual strategic metrics review. At which point marketing begins to resemble an elaborate admin-based religion. And somewhere in the middle of all this, someone quietly asks, are customers actually happier? Which is usually met with the corporate equivalent of a loading screen. Because genuinely useful marketing data requires interpretation, context, judgement, the ability to recognise that humans are not spreadsheets wearing shoes. The best marketers understand this instinctively. They use data to guide decisions, not to replace thinking entirely, because while metrics can reveal patterns, they cannot fully explain behaviour. And they definitely cannot replace intuition, creativity, or understanding people. Which is frustrating, because replacing people with dashboards would make meetings much shorter. But unfortunately, marketing still involves humans, and humans, as we've established, remain wildly committed to being complicated.
Part 4. The comfort of overthinking.
Now, naturally, as overthinkers, our response to uncertainty is both immediate and entirely predictable. We attempt to solve it by thinking harder. If a campaign underperforms, we analyse it. If engagement drops, we investigate it. If a landing page converts poorly, we stare at heat maps with the emotional intensity of detectives examining evidence in a crime drama. Because marketers are deeply optimistic people. We genuinely believe if we examine enough data, ask enough questions, and open it just one more dashboard, clarity will eventually emerge. Like enlightenment or a slightly better bounce rate. Unfortunately, this is not how reality behaves, because overthinking marketing data is a bit like trying to interpret James using Microsoft Excel. Patterns begin to appear everywhere, tiny fluctuations suddenly feel meaningful, and before long someone is emotionally convinced that changing a button colour caused a complete collapse in consumer confidence. Many years ago I encountered a client who became absolutely convinced the marketing campaign had failed catastrophically. The reports were reviewed repeatedly. Meetings were held, expressions became very serious. At one point, someone actually used the phrase,
"We may need to completely rethink the brand."
which is marketing language for, well, everybody panicked politely. The reason for this concern? Well, website traffic had apparently dropped by almost 70%. A very alarming figure, potentially disastrous, except after several tense days of analysis, someone eventually discovered the analytics dashboard had been comparing the last 7 days with the last 7 hours. And yet, remarkably, this did not stop anyone confidently presenting theories. Entire explanations had already been constructed.
Consumer behavior is shifting. Audience sentiment has changed. The market may be losing trust.
No. It turned out Gary had selected the wrong drop-down menu, which, to be fair, has probably altered the course of more business strategy than anyone would comfortably admit. This is the danger of overthinking data without perspective, because numbers seem authoritative, even when they're incomplete, misunderstood, or quietly being sabotaged by someone exporting the wrong spreadsheet. And naturally, once uncertainty enters the room, marketing people begin attempting to interpret meaning from absolutely everything. A campaign performs well on Tuesday.
Excellent. Why Tuesday? Could Tuesday be the key? Should all future launches happen on Tuesdays? Someone, make a note about Tuesdays.
A post underperforms at 4 p.m. Well, concerning.
Perhaps the audience has fundamentally changed, or perhaps they were making dinner.
There is a unique stage of marketing overanalysis where normal human behaviour begins sounding like a strategic anomaly. People leaving a website after 8 seconds becomes audience disengagement patterns. Nobody clicking a pop-up becomes conversion friction. A customer ignoring 3 promotional emails becomes lifestyle communication fatigue. Sometimes people are simply busy, or tired, or trying to buy socks while standing in a supermarket queue. Not every behaviour requires a white paper, and yet there is value in overthinking. Well, up to a point. Because curiosity improves marketing. Questioning assumptions improves marketing. Testing ideas improves marketing. The problem begins when overthinking stops being useful and starts becoming, emotional archaeology, where teams spend weeks trying to uncover deep strategic meaning behind outcomes that were in reality caused by, poor timing, unclear messaging, or somebody accidentally scheduling a campaign during a major football final. This is why the best marketers learn something extremely important. Data should inform decisions, not emotionally destabilise everyone involved. Because marketing will always contain uncertainty. There will always be variables you can't predict. Human reactions you can't fully measure. And occasionally reports that would suggest total disaster right up until someone notices the filters are wrong. Which means the goal isn't perfect certainty. It's learning how to think clearly, without spiraling into interpretive madness every time a graph slopes slightly downwards. Because if marketing teaches us anything, it's that confidence and accuracy are not always travelling together.
Part 5. What actually matters.
So after all of this, the dashboards, the reports, the metrics, the meetings where people say granular with alarming confidence, we arrive at an important question. What actually matters? Because despite the complexity of modern marketing, the fundamentals remain surprisingly human. Good marketing still depends on things that are difficult to fully measure. Empathy, timing, trust, relevance, communication, and understanding what people actually care about when they're not being observed by analytics software. Which is, slightly inconvenient, because businesses love measurable certainty, whereas humans continue to operate more like emotionally inconsistent weather systems. Data can tell you where attention went, but it cannot fully explain why something connected. Why one campaign felt memorable while another felt like it was written by a committee trapped in a meeting room with weak coffee and no natural light. And this is where marketers occasionally lose perspective, because after staring at enough spreadsheets it becomes possible to forget that customers are not users. They are people. People with moods, people with distractions, people trying to remember passwords while at the same time deciding what to eat. The easiest way to explain modern marketing is to introduce you to Edward. Now, Edward is imaginary, but emotionally very real.
Oh, well, hello there.
Edward recently visited a website selling premium office chairs. Now, Edward, would you describe yourself as a rational consumer?
Absolutely.
And why did you buy the most expensive chair?
I compared specifications, materials, and ergonomic support ratings.
Right, and the lumbar support?
Couldn't tell you, but emotionally, I feel that it suggested success.
Exactly. And this is the problem with marketing reports, because somewhere in the analytics dashboard, Edward appears as, well, a converted user. Which sounds wonderfully scientific. But the actual customer journey was this.
I saw a confident Scandinavian man holding coffee, and now I believe my life can improve. To be fair, the lighting was beyond extraordinary.
This is what marketers are actually dealing with. Not machines, not predictable systems, but emotional decision-making wrapped in professional language. And the best marketers understand this. They don't optimize for clicks, they optimize for connection, for clarity, for trust, because the campaigns people remember are rarely the ones with the most impressive spreadsheet performance. They're the ones that felt relevant, human, interesting. Edward, for example, once purchased a £80 candle because the website described it as being grounding. What does that even mean?
I don't honestly know, but it implied I'd become the sort of person who owns linen shirts voluntarily.
And somehow that worked. Which brings us to the real point. Great marketing isn't simply about collecting more data. It's about understanding the people behind the data. Because metrics alone cannot tell you what matters emotionally. They can only suggest patterns. And while patterns are useful, they're not the same thing as understanding. The best marketing still requires judgment, creativity, instinct. The ability to recognise when something feels right even if the spreadsheet hasn't fully caught up yet. Because ultimately, people don't remember metrics, they remember feelings. Which is frustrating for analysts, but excellent news for anyone capable of writing a genuinely good headline.
Part 6. The Truth About Marketing.
So, after all the dashboards, the reports, the graphs, the conversion funnels, the strategy decks, the emergency meetings about engagement metrics, and Edward emotionally purchasing Scandinavian furniture, we arrive at the uncomfortable truth about marketing. It is not pure science. And it is not pure creativity either. It exists somewhere awkwardly in between, like a statistician forced to improvise jazz. Because marketing is fundamentally an attempt to understand people. And people, despite centuries of research and several extremely confident TED Talks, remain gloriously difficult to predict. Now, naturally, businesses dislike uncertainty. This is understandable. Uncertainty feels risky, untidy, financially suspicious, which is why organisations constantly search for certainty through data, systems, frameworks and reports with titles like
Strategic Consumer Behavior Insights for Q3.
Which sounds impressive right up until you realise it mostly confirms people clicked more when the button was larger. There is something strangely comforting about a very large report, even when nobody reads it. A 94-page presentation somehow feels more trustworthy than a simple sentence like,
Customers found the website confusing.
executives will stare thoughtfully at pie charts for hours, but tell them people didn't understand the message and suddenly everybody wants specifics. And yet, despite all this complexity, the best marketing is often surprisingly simple. Not simplistic, simple. Clear message, clear value, clear understanding of people. Because underneath all the analytics and optimization, marketing is still communication. You are still trying to answer the basic human questions. Why should I care? Can I trust this? Will this improve my life? And
Why does this advert keep following me around the internet like a disappointed relative?
this is why even the most sophisticated marketing strategies still depend on emotional truth. Because humans rarely make decisions based entirely on logic. They make decisions based on how something feels, then construct wonderfully convincing explanations afterwards. Edward, for instance, remains absolutely convinced he purchased the luxury office chair because of ergonomic engineering, not because the website described it as for visionary thinkers.
Well, I am thinking more visionarily now.
You mostly use it to watch documentaries while eating pistachios.
Comfortably.
And honestly, that's marketing. Not manipulation, not deception, just understanding what matters to people emotionally, often before they fully understand it themselves. Which is why the best marketers are not the people who eliminate uncertainty entirely. Those people usually end up selling software subscriptions on LinkedIn while using the phrase
Predictable, scalable growth systems.
no. The best marketers are the people who become comfortable working with uncertainty, testing ideas, learning from mistakes, adjusting when things fail, remaining curious instead of defensive. Because failure in marketing is not evidence of incompetence, it's evidence that humans continue being humans. Complicated, emotional, occasionally impossible to interpret, and perhaps that's the most important thing to remember. Marketing isn't about controlling people, it's about understanding them well enough to communicate clearly. Sometimes the data helps enormously, sometimes the data creates panic over a misconfigured dashboard, and sometimes, despite all the strategy, optimization, and analysis, a campaign succeeds simply because it made someone feel understood at exactly the right moment. Which is deeply inconvenient for anyone hoping marketing could become entirely automated, but wonderfully reassuring for anyone capable of empathy, creativity, and paying attention. So, is marketing just guessing? No, but it is experimentation, observation, interpretation. A strange mixture of psychology, communication, timing, and educated instinct held together with dashboards and mild anxiety. And honestly, that's probably why people love it, even when it drives them completely mad. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Overthinker's Guide to Modern Marketing. Until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and remember, good marketing doesn't come from pretending you know everything. It comes from being willing to learn continuously while trying not to overreact every time a graph slopes gently downwards, because growth rarely belongs to the people who feel completely certain. It belongs to the people willing to test, adapt, rethink, and occasionally admit Edward may have influenced strategy more than analytics did.
The chair was very grounding.
And if all else fails, at least make sure your dashboards are comparing the correct dates. Before we disappear back into the strange and emotionally complicated world of marketing dashboards for another month, I just want to say a genuine thank you to everyone who's been listening to the podcast and sharing it with other wonderfully overthinking human beings. The support so far has been honestly amazing. It turns out there are far more people interested in mildly philosophical conversations about marketing, psychology, branding, and the emotional instability caused by analytics dashboards than I originally expected, which is both reassuring and faintly concerning for society as a whole. Now, I've also had a surprising number of people ask whether they can buy Overthinker's Guide to Modern Marketing t-shirt, which is flattering, slightly unexpected I have to admit, and raises the real possibilities that somewhere at some point a stranger may walk past wearing clothing inspired by conversations about conversion funnels. At the moment, there's no immediate plan to launch merchandise, mostly because I'm still emotionally processing the idea that podcast merchandise is now a sentence I have to now take seriously, but if enough people generally want it, we can absolutely set something up. So if the idea of wearing deeply niched marketing humour in public appeals to you, drop me a line through the website or LinkedIn and register your interest. Ideally, obviously, cited somewhere aesthetically expensive and holding a drink that requires a backstory. And while you're there, I genuinely would love to hear your ideas for future episodes too. If there's a topic you'd like to explored, overthought, or gently dismantled over the course of 30 slightly existential minutes, let me know. And equally, if you have ideas for improving the podcast, bringing on guests, interviews, listeners' questions, deeper dives into certain topics, I'm always interested to hear them too. Because much like marketing itself, this podcast is essentially an ongoing experiment held together with curiosity, overthinking, and occasionally slide 14. Thank you again. Until next time, cheers!
The Overthinker's Guide to Modern Marketing is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, and most places where people go to think slightly more deeply, while pretending they opened the analytics dashboard just for a quick look.